I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown. And this week, we're going to be looking at one of my favorite categories I love to do every single year, the Best Documentary category. So, if you guys are new to this series, what I do every single week is I first start off the show by talking about what movies are rising and falling. Sometimes I do combination episodes where I do some reactions, but every single week I talk about movies that are rising and falling in sort of the Oscars landscape, movies that are doing less, sort of losing buzz, movies that are gaining hype, and that will sort of judge the landscape of in terms of what's going to get nominated and then what's going to win. But right now, the version of the show is just me predicting each and every week what in different categories what I think is going to get nominated. As we get closer to the actual nomination date, I'm going to be sort of combining things that make a little more sense. Some smaller categories, things like production design and makeup and hairstyling will sort of go together, and score and soundtrack and whatnot as we get closer to the Oscars in sort of the bigger episodes. But for right now, they're going to be single individual, so I can give them some more important categories that are the more interesting, more popular, I guess, categories even, and more categories that we know about, the best actor, the best picture, whatnot, give those guys more attention. But starting off with the main sort of topic of the show at the beginning, movies that are rising and falling. A movie that I think is rising, I have two this week. The first one being Mary, Queen of Scots. I thought this was completely out of the race, although it has come out at the box office. The thing is, it's got middling reviews. The box office hasn't been fantastic. It's not like it's a huge hit or whatever, but it has been sort of well respected. People enjoy it. The critics in particular have been sort of praising, a great performance like Saoirse Ronan or Margot Robbie, and you never want to count either of those guys out, and especially someone like Margot Robbie, who got nominated at the SAG Awards. Now, there's some, weird ones. There's also, Emily Blunt at A Quiet Place. And SAG is such a huge organization with so many different voters. It could be sometimes misleading, even though there is a lot of overlap with them and the Academy. Sometimes it can be misleading. So even though it is rising for this week, it's one of those ones where, similarly to last week, Leave No Trace, it could get a single nomination. I just don't want you guys to completely write it off your radar. Which a film like, I'd probably say Widows, even though Widows was sort of played as maybe a festival favorite and a movie that would sort of get some buzz and maybe some nominations. I'm kind of putting that off my radar because it hasn't got any of these precursors, because it did well at the box office, because its conversation is losing out. That's a movie that you maybe want to forget about. But even though Mary, Queen of Scots has a less of a profile, you still want to sort of keep it in the back of your mind, because it could be a surprise nomination for someone like Margot Robbie. The other rising I had here is Mary Poppins Returns, just because it has come out to overall sort of relatively positive critical reception. It did well at the box office, coming in at second behind Aquaman, but musicals never have, a huge opening. There's some, like, if you remember The Greatest Showman from last year, they just sort of have legs at the box office. They stay around each and every week. They sort of drop less, and sort of has a great word of mouth with musicals. So it's doing well at the box office, doing well critically. So I'm seeing, a potential, if someone like Emily Blunt wins the Golden Globes, she could be starting to be a real threat for the Oscar, especially for getting nominated. That's definitely for sure, especially with her sort of two nominations, SAG nominations. That's a really sort of key solidifier that I think she's probably going to get in for Best Lead Actress for this movie. And then for falling, I have here Beautiful Boy, just because it was like a movie that we thought was going to be a big thing, and then it wasn't, and it's just been losing steam continually. We thought it was Timothée Chalamet for Best Supporting Actor for a win, and maybe someone like Steve Carell gets in, and maybe adapted screenplay. But as we go on, adapted screenplay seems very unlikely. Steve Carell seems unlikely with his sort of recent bomb, Welcome to Marwen. And then even Timothée Chalamet, I'm not saying he's not going to get in. I think he's going to get in at this point, but I wouldn't be surprised in a category that's very competitive with, maybe Sam Rockwell or Michael B. Jordan or one of these guys, or Adam Driver, takes his place. Right now I have him in my 5th slot. I think some of the other guys are more of a solid chance. So Timothée Chalamet, I wouldn't be surprised if Beautiful Boy sort of gets knocked off the radar, even though he was a front runner at one point. That being said, he's got in at SAG, he's got in at Golden Globes, so if there were a surprise, it probably would have happened by now, but I still could see a surprise come Oscar nominations night. Okay, let's move over into my first pick, which is RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And excuse me if I say RGB, because I always think of that as red, green, blue. When we talk about a keyboard or something, this is RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. If you don't know this about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she was a American lawyer who eventually became a judge and then a Supreme Court, was on the Supreme Court of the U.S. justice system. Very prolific judge, and has a really interesting sort of career and fought a lot about and did a lot for women's and women's rights, particularly in the 60s and 70s, and then even up until the 90s when she became on the Supreme Court. And I think that why I have this in my first slot is that it follows the sort of two trends of the year. The first trend being the popular documentary. Just when I thought the documentary at the movie theater was dead, these movies sort of came out of nowhere and proved that it wasn't. I thought it was sort of everyone watched documentaries on Netflix. That's what they're going to stay. I mean, I think that's obviously the future, especially for something like documentary. But there was this movie, there was Three Identical Strangers, and Won't You Be My Neighbor. All my predictions of getting nominations were all big hits during the summer. They all made a lot of money. I think each one sort of riding off the back of one another. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg sort of came in this wave and followed it. So for a documentary to do really good at the box office, that really helps. And that's sort of the trend of this year, is that these documentaries, they're doing very well at the box office. They're sort of the popular documentaries, but still have sort of maybe a bit of a political sort of unique angle to them, are doing very well at the box office, and that's sort of a trend this year. But another trend I think of this year is, or sort of another trend, not this year, but of just previous years, is the more political documentary winning or getting nominated. We only see now maybe one or not even two, sometimes none, sort of feel-good movies sort of getting in for documentary. Last year, the winner was Icarus, beating out a movie like Faces Places, and then years before, I remember the year of Cartel Land was like Cartel Land, or Whatever Happened to Miss Simone, and Winter on Fire. And more political movies so that we see are winning, movies like Citizen4. I just think that the nominations in particular and the winners are becoming less of sort of entertaining documentary pieces, and they're more serious, they're more political, although it does sort of lean into that political thriller. And now, while this movie is not directly sort of about sort of the injustices and sort of an angry or a very controversial sort of, Icarus is about the corruption, Citizen4 was about sort of NSA looking at your stuff. It's sort of an angry documentary. This one's not. What's the sort of charm about this movie, and what it does very well, is balancing the home life and her relationship with her husband and her children, her grandchildren, and who she is as a person, with what she did for the States. The only negative and drawback I'd say of this getting nominated is that it is very American focused. There was sometimes, as a non-American, confused about the U.S. justice system and how it all worked. But overall they did a pretty good job about that. So I just have some concerns for maybe some of the international voters, which could be sort of persuaded not to see it. But I think overall the film does a good job and relies on that other aspect, the home life aspect. I think it does very well, and which is why I don't think it's too much of a drawback. But just the fact that it's in this mold of being a successful documentary, which is the trend of this year, and then also being a political movie that has something to say and talks about women's rights, and sort of the movement that you could say is kind of going on with the Me Too stuff, sort of directly influenced the Oscars. That could have a relationship, but regardless, I think RBG was a very interesting figure, a well-done documentary, and a documentary that makes you feel good, but also makes you sort of want to go out in the streets and fight and really represent yourself very well. So that was good. I think that's why it's in my number one pick. My number two pick is what a lot of people consider as the winner, which very well could be the winner, which is Won't You Be My Neighbor. The only reason why it's maybe number two is, like I said, it's a feel-good movie. There are some political aspects to it, actually, which are sort of surprising, that you do learn about Mr. Rogers, and how he's not just this sort of sweet guy. Like, he's the sweet guy, that's kind of the point of the documentary, but that he's not just does it in his show all the time, that he tried to teach kids about, race and and sort of this is 60s and 70s, and sort of some trailblazing things, and talked about suicide and sort of some dark themes on some of the shows, and trying to, touch these big topics in these kid-friendly kind of ways and make it, relatable to them in really interesting ways. So there are some serious moments of this documentary. But similarly to RGB, this was actually the biggest box office success of the summer. I think it made like $22 million, which is maybe, that's not a lot, but for a documentary like this, it is, I thought documentaries were completely dead at the box office. I didn't know people watch documentaries at the box office, in movie theaters. Maybe I'm part of the problem, but at least my generation doesn't. But this was definitely a word of mouth movie. This was a movie where, have you seen it? Oh, it's so emotional, make you cry. You have to see it. It's amazing. Great word of mouth on this one. People walking out of it loved it because it's so emotional, because it made so many people cry. Similarly to like a Pixar movie or something like that. It was that very sort of highly recommended. It's a feel good kind of movie. Like, we always, even though the trend is away from that, we always still get movies like that. I talked about Faces Places last year. The year before that was Life Animated. So there are some feel-good documentaries that do get it in. And for a documentary like this, where it was, I think the highest documentary, probably the highest gross documentary of the year, and maybe I guess Fahrenheit 11/9, but maybe it's up there for sure. And I think also, when I was doing research here, it said, yes, it's one of the highest, it's the highest grossing biographical documentary of all time, of a person, and it's in the top 25 of the highest grossing documentaries of all time. So it's a huge hit. It would almost be sort of criminal not to give it to it, because it's been such a cultural sort of landmark, and Mr. Rogers is such an interesting figure, and he is such an important figure that we sort of didn't realize was that important. But then I guess the thing about it is that documentary is pretty simple. It's nice. That'd be a throwback, and it doesn't sort of fit the modern day investigative journalist documentaries, political thrillers that we're seeing today, even though it has a little bit of a political serious aspect to it. But it's a feel-good movie. It's a big box office hit. It's following the trend of this year. It's by an Oscar winner, Morgan Neville. So I'm pretty confident that this one will get a nomination. This one here is Free Solo. This is a movie that's so stunningly shot that you almost forget it's a documentary. I think the charm of this movie and why this documentary succeeds is because not only are you amazed by the unique, cinematography and angles, but also you think, oh wait, how did the cameraman, or how did the person operating the camera do that? I think, when I think documentaries, I think someone sitting in a chair, sort of looking off camera, talking to someone else, intercut with other footage, related footage. But this one was very unique, very different. You can see the angles that they were able to achieve, while also talking about this guy's story and making sort of a documentary about motivation and perseverance. Was very unique. And you almost forget that it is a documentary, and you're stunned by just how thrilling it is, because it's so much of an edge of your seat. You don't know if he's going to survive or whatnot. So there's both that sort of thrilling aspect of this man who's climbing this giant rock with no ropes or anything, and then also this camera crew that was able to do this, to be able to create these amazing shots. It was so interesting and so intricate and very unique. The throwback with it is that it's just an entertaining documentary. It doesn't have a whole lot to say in terms of, like I said, sort of a message. It does have sort of the determination, perseverance, kind of, doing it for big reasons bigger than himself, kind of facet of it. I just don't think that it's maybe overtly as political as something like, RBG or something like that, which, could hurt, like I said, because of this recent trend. That being said, incredibly thrilling, incredibly entertaining. I think people will walk out of it with their palms sweaty. I think people will really enjoy it, and it's just a very unique documentary. So it'll stick in people's minds. So I think that's why it's going to get nominated. Three Identical Strangers. This is about these three men who, eventually find each other after one goes to a college that the other one just left. And then they find out there's twins, and then they find out there's three. They didn't know of their brothers. They didn't know they had brothers, and then they're identical brothers. And really, this movie is so entertaining. It's also thrilling, which is really fits that sort of political thriller aspect to it. It's similarly to RBG and Won't You Be My Neighbor, another big box office hit of the summer. I think it was the second place of those three, making around $12 million, although RBG I think it made 11 or 12 too. And the movie's fascinating and so entertaining because you think it's going to go one way, and then it goes about 5 different kinds of ways. You think you're watching one movie, and then it changes, and then it changes back, and then it changes to something else. And I think that it starts with sort of this entertaining movie about these guys. It was very interesting, sort of mystery, finding each other, and then once they find each other, the sort of fame that they actually find, and they're going on talk shows and whatnot. But then they sort of try to tackle the central topic of, well, what happened? Why aren't we together? Which leads them down on a really interesting path, and a serious path. So this movie, by all accounts, is one of my favorites of the year. I love this movie, and it's really, it's incredibly thrilling, and there are some more serious aspects of it. It's a hard movie to talk about because I don't want to spoil it. Just know that it's thrilling, it's incredibly entertaining. You won't be bored by it all. You're in the movie the entire time. And I think Oscar voters will gravitate to that. It follows the trend of the box office hit of the year. It's been getting nominated. That's where it needs to get nominated. And I think that, yes, it's not sort of overtly political, but that's the thing with a lot of these movies, is they have another aspect to them, which is at least poses interesting questions and moral ambiguities. I'll leave it at that. That will help theoretical change. So it's not just sort of entertainment, which is more a Free Solo's thing, but Free Solo was so different and so unique that I think we'll get in. This one is more traditional, but still incredibly entertaining, and still has a little, and plays like a thriller, just not a political thriller, and has some of those interesting moral questions that it raises. I'll leave it at that. I think it's going to get nominated. And my last pick goes to Crime and Punishment. This is a documentary by Hulu, and I think, or it's on Hulu at least, and I think this is that's going to be sort of the defining factor of it. All this entire episode, I'm talking about the political aspect of it, and I think, this could be a movie. Dark Money could be a movie. Hale County Morning This Evening. This Morning This Evening could be a movie that's sort of more serious and talks about Hale County talks about life as an African American in the States. Dark Money is about sort of influencing elections. This one's about NYPD and I think LAPD as well. Maybe just NYPD. Cops sort of exposing the illegal quotas within their system. So it has the more, I only put this one in because it has the overtly political aspect to it, which I think would go over another sort of honorable mention, which is also streaming, say like Minding the Gap, that's more of a skateboarding movie that has issues of domestic violence, but that's sort of all the other ones. The other ones have sort of one element and then a political element to it. This is the only one I think that is really overtly political and sort of obvious in talking about these problems within these cops and these illegal quotas and the corruption that's going on, the Serpico aspect to it. I think that plus it's also streaming on Hulu. We've seen Netflix documentaries do very well. I think this is a category where if it's streaming, the better chance you are to get nominated. I mean, think of something like Winter on Fire, or Whatever Happened to Miss Simone, or I think Amy was streaming on Netflix. I don't know if it's a Netflix documentary, but Icarus last year won. So they really, I think Amy was, I think, and Amy won the documentary prize, the Oscar. So streaming movies would definitely help to get nominated. So I wouldn't be surprised if this one sort of gets in because of its sort of overtly political nature, and that sort of follows the trend. And will benefit from that streaming factor. And then some honorable mentions. I talked about Minding the Gap, skateboarding film, a beautiful film, one of my favorites of the year as well. And but also has sort of that serious domestic violence thing and really confronts it head on, which is amazing and what I really enjoy about the movie. Shirkers, which is about a girl who was trying to make a movie and then stopped, and years later is trying to remake it, which is very interesting. the less sort of the mold today. Dark Money I talked about, Hale County this morning, this evening I talked about both movies that are political that could sort of get in over Crime and Punishment, but I picked Crime and Punishment because maybe it's a little more overt than say something like Hale County this morning, this evening, which is more about a personal tale, but we've seen something like last year with Strong Island get nominated, which is more of a personal tale. So you never know with those kind of things. But I'm right now confident in my 5. I think Minding the Gap could get in, could be surprising. Maybe something like Hale County this morning, this evening. But based on what we saw, Minding the Gap could be a sort of threat, but just because of this trend I'm recognizing, I think Crime and Punishment will instead get in over it. This episode's a little too long. I'll end it here. I just love documentaries and getting into the nitty-gritty and what makes them unique and making these stories and then telling those stories great, because that's what's amazing about documentaries, is that you can't just tell this amazing story, you have to tell it in an entertaining way and in a different way. And I think there's so many different types of documentaries, and I'm just very interested in them in general. And I think this is going to be a very interesting category, because it always is at the Oscars, is you never know really what's going to win. I mean, Icarus was kind of a surprise win last year. You never know. That's about it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Like and comment, subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments down below. What are your favorite documentaries of all time? I'm going to have a bit of a conversation there. I hope you had a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. I hope that was amazing. And until next time, stay tuned.